podcasting about cryptocurrencies is a strange occupation. You get emails all the time from companies that are doing a token sale that you would never want to be affiliated with. You get angry tweets from anonymous Twitter accounts that are on one side or another of the Bitcoin scaling debate. And you also get to interview extreme personalities, and the technical discussions around cryptocurrencies can be highly educational. Fabian Crain started the Epicenter podcast 4 years ago. Podcasting about cryptocurrencies allows a podcaster like Brian to report on a wide variety of areas: economics, software, philosophy. And the stories within the blockchain world itself are overlapping among all these different topics. Epicenter is one of my favorite podcasts about cryptocurrencies because Brian is always prepared enough to ask sophisticated questions. And in this episode, we talk about a wide variety of things. We talked about ICOs. When does an ICO make sense? It seems that many token economies could function just as well without a token involved. And we discuss what these token economies will become if their token is not necessary. We discussed the scaling approaches of Bitcoin and Ethereum. Why are these two blockchains taking very different approaches to their scaling plans? And we also talked about Chorus, which is the company that Brian founded to build infrastructure for proof-of-stake cryptocurrencies. I enjoyed talking to Brian about all these different subjects, and I look forward to having him on again in the future. I recommend anybody who is a fan of the cryptocurrency shows we've done to check out Epicenter. It's really a great show. Azure Container Service simplifies the deployment, management, and operations of Kubernetes. Eliminate the complicated planning and deployment of fully orchestrated, containerized applications with Kubernetes. You can quickly provision clusters to be up and running in no time, while simplifying your monitoring and cluster management through auto upgrades and a built-in operations console. Avoid being locked into any one vendor or resource. You can continue to work with the tools that you already know, such as Helm, and move applications to any Kubernetes deployment. Integrate with your choice of container registry, including Azure Container Registry. Also, quickly and efficiently scale to maximize your resource utilization without having to take your applications offline. Isolate your application from infrastructure failures and transparently scale the underlying infrastructure to meet growing demands, all while increasing the security, reliability, and availability of critical business workloads with Azure. To learn more about Azure Container Service and other Azure services, as well as receive a free ebook by Brendan Burns, go to aka.ms/sedaily. Brendan Burns is the creator of Kubernetes, and his ebook is about some of the distributed systems design lessons that he has learned building Kubernetes. That ebook is available at aka.ms/sedaily. Fabian Crain, you are the host of Epicenter. Welcome to Software Engineering Daily.
Thanks so much for having me.
I enjoy Epicenter. It's a podcast about blockchain technology. Why did you start podcasting about blockchains?
Yeah, so I learned about Bitcoin in the summer of 2013, like kind of early summer. And at the time I was finishing a master thesis. So I was, busy with that. And, it was kind of like, okay, how do I learn about Bitcoin? And just what I did was whenever I was on the way anywhere, I would listen to a podcast, and specifically Let's Talk Bitcoin, which was the only podcast at the time. And that's how I learned about Bitcoin. And I had been interested in the podcasting format for a long time and felt it was just a really powerful way to learn about a topic and you kind of get into a field and an industry as well. So then soon afterwards, I wanted to work full-time in the Bitcoin space. And at the time, there wasn't really any jobs and I didn't have, a business idea myself. So what I did was, the first thing I did was I started a meetup group. And I started organizing events. Back then, it was every 2 weeks and get people to do talks. And I gave a lot of talks myself at the time about, just take a topic and give a talk about a particular aspect, where it was like how fees work in Bitcoin or a particular aspect about mining or security of Bitcoin, etc. And the second thing I did was that I started this podcast, which was back in December 2013, together with Sebastian Couture. And yeah, we've been running that podcast, every single week since the first week of January 2014.
Before you went full on into cryptocurrencies, you did spend some time in the traditional finance world. I think you worked as a commodities trader. How does the traditional finance world compare to the cryptocurrency world?
Yes, this is a good question. So I grew up in Switzerland, and then after high school, I went to the US for college. So I went to Chicago and I studied economics at the University of Chicago. And of course, that's sort of a, traditional, well-known economics department. And I had this goal of going to the US from a long time and studying economics. But then once I got there, I was a bit, I had sort of reached that goal and I didn't have a goal beyond that. And I was a little bit lost about what to do. And, I think like in many good universities, if you go to an economics department in undergrad, many of them at that time went into investment banking. And I didn't know what else to do. So I kind of did the same thing. And I ended up doing an internship with HSBC in New York in debt capital markets. So it's kind of like creating bonds, like corporate bonds. And I liked it and I hated it. So what I liked about it is actually finance. I found it was really interesting and I was kind of like, good at it. But at the same time, I really hated the environment and like getting in there every morning. And there was just so much about this whole structure that I revolted against. So in the end, I decided not to do a job there. And I went to go traveling around the world for a while. And then I was again kind of lost and I went back to Switzerland where I'm from and I worked a little bit in this commodities trading thing. I wasn't trading myself. I was doing sort of the trade execution stuff. That was not my favorite job. It was pretty boring. And yeah, I was a little bit lost. And then I ended up going back to school and a master in economics. And then I kind of became interested in startups and technology.
I hear you. I can relate to that. When I was in school, I found finance interesting. I played poker and I liked the incentives. I like looking at charts and thinking about human behavior and how that translates into prices and things like that. And then I found myself looking for a job out of school and I went into a trading company, and then certain aspect, like you said, you love certain aspects of it and you hate other aspects of it. And I think that the thing that when I was at a trading company, what I longed for and what I would see in other areas of the technology world is that there's other areas of the technology world where stuff really gets built. And at a trading company, stuff does get built, but it's securities, it's internal technology to make trading more efficient. And outside of the trading world, you see technology companies where they're building very new things. And in the cryptocurrency world, you see a whole lot of very new things getting built. Do you think these two worlds are colliding? Are the world of traditional finance, is that colliding with the world of cryptocurrencies today?
Well, yes and no. I think there is a lot of technology that's encroaching on that world and trying to reinvent it and redo it. But at the same time, I think these institutions there's such an institutional inertia in them and so much conservatism, and they have such a hard time to innovate and do anything new. So I'm quite skeptical about their ability to adapt to this new world. And I spent from about middle of 2015 to the end of 2016, I was working for this company called Monax. And they started in 2014, and it was the first company at that time to do enterprise Ethereum applications. And I was doing business development for that company. So I spent a lot of time speaking with innovation people at banks and insurance companies and stuff like that. And nothing ever happened. You have so many conversations and, maybe there's some sort of POC after months and they build a little thing and then it dies somewhere. And I feel even today, if you look, so little has happened on the whole enterprise and corporate side. So I feel it's much more that we're going to fundamentally redesign and reinvent how financial interactions work, based on blockchain and decentralized technologies. And I don't really feel there's going to be so much of a merger as a replacement of the existing system.
What kind of topics do you try to cover on your podcast on Epicenter?
So we try to cover whatever we find most interesting personally and what we find is most important in terms of the development of all of this technology. And that has, of course, evolved over time. In the beginning, it was, at least in title, it was called Epicenter Bitcoin. That being said, we started doing episodes, about Ethereum just a few months in, and we started doing a lot of different topics. And then, over time, it was a lot of things about regulation, about scalability, about ICOs, about just a lot of different projects, or applications that people are building on Ethereum, or the investment side has also become a pretty big thing, like how to think about tokens and the valuation of tokens and these new crypto funds. We are very broad. I think we try to cover pretty much anything that's interesting in this wider universe.
Do you try to vet any of these projects? Like, I've had some companies on the show, and when I start researching them, like some of these ICO companies, I'm a little skeptical of the technical quality of what they're building. I do think it's useful to get a snapshot into the time that we live in, where companies with not very well developed technology can raise tons of money, or at least they could raise tons of money 4 or 5 months ago. And sometimes I wonder, like, maybe I shouldn't have even had these kinds of companies on the show in the first place, though. How thoroughly do you try to vet the projects before you accept them as guests?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, we don't have the knowledge nor the time to, do some sort of deep technical vetting or look at the code base or anything like that. Of course, we do look at, let's say, read a white paper, like, okay, is this coherent? Does it make sense? Or maybe look at what stage are they in? So in particular, when it comes to projects doing ICOs, what we try to do is, unless they have, a track record, or it's extremely original idea, or the team has done very interesting things in the past, or something like that makes it really stand out. Sort of our default answer to that is, well, let's do the episode once you guys have launched your product, then come back to us. So we do try to not to have too many projects that are sort of in this ICO promotion phase. But that being said, we've definitely had projects on the podcast where afterwards we felt, we shouldn't have done that. We should have done better. We should have done it before. That was probably wrong to give them a platform. And then we have gotten lots of criticism for that point. Like, we've gotten so many comments, people saying, oh, you guys are promoting shitty projects and you're not being critical enough. This is probably the number one criticism of us, is that we're not being critical enough. So we try to be, but we often don't live up to it.
Well, the thing is, it's really easy to ask critical questions of these ICO companies, because so many of these ICO companies look extremely opportunistic. And unfortunately, it's impossible to tell the ones who just look opportunistic from the ones who might actually be still standing in 5 years. Like, some of these companies, I hope, will be durable.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. To what extent is it predictable? I do feel it's actually possible to vet projects reasonably well. In particular, like, okay, have they worked on this problem for a long time? I think anyone who comes along and, just starts a project because now there's this ICO thing and you can actually monetize it, that's probably a project to be fairly skeptical about. But yeah, I think especially for outsiders of the industry, or who aren't spending like a huge amount of time in this, it's very hard to vet projects. And it's especially, it was obvious in the sort of, November, December, October last year time, when we really had this massive bubble and so many new people started getting interested in this. And so all of a sudden I had all of these people, writing me and emailing me. They're like, oh, I'm starting to invest too, and I'm buying this coin and buying that coin. And the quality of project that these people will buy is very low. So I think there is a big division, maybe also in terms of who these projects target. When there's some projects that are really just focusing on tech, and then they feel like the people who are knowledgeable, they will find it. And then there's others that, just focus on the marketing. And then they find all of the people who, running after this new shiny thing with big promises.
Some of these ICOs, I saw the vesting schedules for some of these, and they have they'll have a 2-year vesting schedule. So you'll have people who are starting a technology product, they're doing an ICO, and they themselves are running the technology, and there's a 2-year vesting schedule for their shares of token. And to me, that's like the biggest red flag ever, where it's basically, after 2 years, I can just leave this project and take all of my coins with me. And I look at that and I'm like, maybe that's a cutting edge idea. Maybe that's, okay, you leave your project after 2 years with the idea that your open source community is going to take it over. Or is that just self-delusional, do you think? Do you think it's insane to think that after 2 years, if you start an ICO, if you start a open source tokenized platform in 2 years, if your tokens vest, do you think there are some of these projects where the open source community will just have purchased these tokens, and so they will have a vested interest in the project, and they will be able to continue to harbor developments in the technology? What should the vesting schedules for these be?
Well, so you're saying 2-year vesting schedules, but I think it's much worse, right? So first of all, even when they have a 2-year vesting schedule, for the most part, they start vesting immediately, and it's more like they vest monthly,
right,
over 2 years. So they can actually start cashing out immediately. And of course, if you have, let's say you have a market cap of 100 million and the team has 20% or things like that, then that vesting over 2 years, that means you have almost $1 million worth of, that particular token that this team can start selling, every single month. And of course, they haven't built anything at that time, at least for the most part, or they've just started. And I think you're absolutely right to point out that these projects will not, I think the idea that, okay, after 2 years, there's some community that takes it over and runs with it, and it just sort of runs itself forever, is certainly an illusion. And I think we are going to see a massive amount of scams, and we have seen a lot of scams, but I think it's going to be much worse in that there's just so many projects that raise this money and they have these tokens and they're going to cash it out, and then these projects are all going to die a slow death.
We are running an experiment to find out if Software Engineering Daily listeners are above average engineers. At triplebyte.com/SEDaily, you can take a quiz to help us gather data. I took the quiz and it covered a wide range of topics: general programming ability, a little security, a little system design. It was a nice short test to measure how my practical engineering skills have changed since I started this podcast. I will admit that, though I've gotten better at talking about software engineering, I have definitely gotten worse at actually writing code and doing software engineering myself. But if you want to take that quiz yourself, you can help us gather data and take that quiz at triplebyte.com/SEDaily. We have been running this experiment for a few weeks, and I'm happy to report that Software Engineering Daily listeners are absolutely crushing it so far. TripleByte has told me that everyone who has taken the test, on average, is 3 times more likely to be in their top bracket of quiz scores. And if you're looking for a job, TripleByte is a great place to start your search. It fast-tracks you at hundreds of top tech companies. TripleByte takes engineers seriously and does not waste their time, which is what I try to do with Software Engineering Daily myself. And I recommend checking out triplebyte.com/SEDaily. That's triplebyte.com/SEDaily. TripleByte, byte as in 8 bits. Thanks to TripleByte for being a sponsor of Software Engineering Daily. We appreciate it. What do you think is the psychology of these ICO hawkers? Because obviously some of them know that they are complete scammers. I think I saw, what was this one yesterday, like a drone ICO company or something like that, where the founder had literally changed the website to some South Park meme that was like, hey, I took your money and ran away with it. That's like the extreme end of it. But at the more subtle granularities of this ICO insanity, you have people who are self-delusional, where they have convinced themselves to some degree that their project makes sense and that then they're actually building some useful technology. But at the same time, they have something like a 2-year vesting schedule that, like you said, has monthly vesting. And so there's some disconnect there. You've interacted with enough of these people. Like, what do you think is the psychology there?
Right. So I think you're totally right that amount of actual scams is probably not that high, but the amount of projects that are going to turn into some sort of quasi-scam, I think, is very high. And the quasi-scam is exactly the self-delusional thing. You know, someone with some sort of half-baked idea starts something. They don't really question enough whether this whole thing makes sense. They don't do enough research. Then they, run out. They start raising money and, put a lot of effort into marketing. Maybe they raise money. Maybe at the say all of the time, there's some sort of doubt. Does it really make sense? Are we competent enough? Can we do this? But, you go ahead and let's say people actually put money in it. And then I think it's very easy to start believing that this whole thing makes sense, right? The market is validating it. This must be a good idea. And then let's say this token starts trading. And of course, again, it is very easy to say, okay, we have succeeded. We have launched something here. And so I think the aspect that they're immediately liquid and that you have this market feedback mechanism can probably contribute a lot to projects, thinking they're competent and they're on the right track and they're doing something and that they're going to succeed and that they have to build value. I think this is the other illusion, right? Just because people are trading it and buying for a particular amount, the idea that, okay, now I've deserved these 10 million that these tokens are worth.
Right. Are you convinced that the ICO is a useful tool at this point? Because I've tried to ask some of these ICO companies a question, why not just, if you need a currency for your product, if you need a specific currency, why not just use Ethereum? You could just use, or Ether. You could just use Ether as the currency, your domain-specific currency. I do see the value of having these domain-specific coins within certain contexts, just like at an arcade. Maybe it makes sense to have Chuck E. Cheese coins at the Chuck E. Cheese arcade. But I'm a little dubious. Like, you look at Amazon, for example, most of the transactions that go through Amazon are in USD. They don't have some they don't encourage people to build the Amazon gift certificate economy and transact in Amazon gift certificates all the time. I mean, I guess they do have the Amazon credit card where, you get 5% off if you use the Amazon credit card. And so ICOs could do something like that, where like you wash your Ether in some sort of ICO transaction or some domain-specific transactionality, and then you get a discount or something. But I'm kind of, I don't know, I just wonder if actually we need so many tokens.
Right. So I think there's multiple things here. So one is the question of, are all of these tokens necessary? And I'm sure in many cases they're not. And they're just there because they're a great way to raise money. And of course, I'm very skeptical that those projects will succeed, not least because generally they'll be open source. And so, and if the token is just added to, to raise money, then probably the token doesn't have a core functionality. It actually adds friction to the product. It makes it a worse product. So you can just fork it, get rid of the token, and you have a better product. And then, of course, the value proposition is extremely bad. So that's one problem. That being said, I do think the idea of creating these incentive systems and rewarding people with tokens or having tokens for some sort of staking function or maybe sometimes for payments in an application. I think there is a lot of interesting and positive effect or like aspects of this too. And, of course, Ethereum is a great example, right? So many good things and so much innovation has come out of that. And that was an ICO. So I think that, there's both. Now, at this point, of course, the ICO has become, I think, an extremely risky way to go, also from a legal and regulatory perspective, especially if you do anything with like US residents, US people. So, it seems pretty clear that at this point, the trend is very clearly away from ICOs and having some sort of private sales and then having maybe tokens that are given out to users in an application. And, there's pros and cons to that. I mean, on the one hand, maybe it will mean less fraud, maybe. It's certainly less risky for these projects. But on the other hand, it's also a little bit sad because even though there are a lot of bad things about ICOs, and we've spoken about the bad things and about these tokens, one of the great things is that it has opened up access to investing in these things to just a huge range of people. And that's great, right? This democratization of finance and of these applications, they are getting lost currently.
Completely agree with that. I really like your point. If the technology makes sense, but the fundraising, it's not clear how to fundraise, so they tack on a token in order to facilitate fundraising. Well, if the quality of the technology pans out, then somebody can just fork it and make it compliant with Ether or make it compliant with USD or Bitcoin or whatever is a more widely accepted currency, then the value of the token is just going to go away. You're an economist. Like, take something like Filecoin, right? Filecoin is widely accepted even among a lot of the skeptics as this is one of the higher quality token sales. But I could imagine a Filecoin network where you're not required to use to transact with Filecoin. From your economist side of your brain, do you have a set of criteria where you can look at an economy and say, okay, this economy is something that is going to make use of a token in the long term rather than just a short-term fundraising vector?
I think that the key question or the key point to start at just is, would it be possible to build this application without that token? Or does this application gain something essential from having a particular token? And, if you look at something like Bitcoin, you could not have Bitcoin without Bitcoin, of course. And again, with Ethereum, you couldn't have Ethereum without a native token to pay for gas and transaction fees, right? So in each of those cases, they're actually an absolutely fundamental component of the network. And again, if you look at now proof of stake networks, well, the staking token is essential, right, for the security of the network. So you need that. And then I think there's a strong use case for it. Now, if you look at a token to pay for a particular application, then I think probably in most cases, you don't need that. So I think I would probably look at it through that lens. So first of all, just, is this token necessary? And then, assuming it is necessary, then of course there's questions about, valuation and supply and the quality of the project, the quality of the team. I think I would probably look at it through those two angles.
Yeah. And what I wonder is to what degree, the network effect comes into it. Because, if you look into, I, like everybody else in the Silicon Valley herd, has taken a look at Sapiens, and in Sapiens, he writes a lot about why do people use money, and a lot of the reason that people use money is because we have all told ourselves enough of a story about paper money that we all believe it, and so we're all willing to transact with it. So there's this network effect quality where it doesn't even matter if there's some intrinsic need for it. Once a currency passes a certain threshold of wide acceptability, it becomes valuable. And so there is this network effect that can emerge, this tulip-like phenomenon. And so it's almost like you maybe trying to pin down some sort of intrinsic value is less important than is the project structured in a way where the token can achieve network effects. Like you look at something like Filecoin, okay, so IPFS is useful even without the Filecoin network, as we've seen with the Wikipedia. It's like a censorship-resistant file storage network, potentially. So we saw with the Wikipedia in Turkey thing, it evaded censorship. I'm not sure to what degree people were actually using it, but there was some practicality there. So you could imagine IPFS becoming widely useful, and at the same time, you're gradually having investors have access to Filecoin via pre-sale. So maybe Filecoin makes its way around the world, and so you have people using Filecoin, or people having Filecoin as an investment. So once the Filecoin network comes online, you have people who are incentivized to set up these nodes, and the nodes have an economy that is backed by Filecoin, and it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy because they architected the distribution of the coins well enough. I don't know. It's so hard to predict how these things will play out, but I can understand the high speculation and the high anticipation of Filecoin just because of the quality of the core technology and the sophistication of the team in terms of how they know the network effects need to develop. I don't know. I guess I don't have any concise thoughts there, but...
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up network effects, and that's an important point. And I think if the token is a key way to create network effects, then that may well be a totally legitimate and strong use case for a token. So yeah, I think if that's the case, if you have this token and the token is going to be the key incentive mechanism to create these massive network effects, well, fantastic. Then perhaps there is really a big use case for it. I don't honestly have an opinion on whether that's the case in Filecoin. I don't understand that project well enough, but maybe the case.
Yeah, likewise. Well, I'll have to ask somebody from that team about it. Let's talk about more tangential things, or tangible things, I should say. Bitcoin and Ethereum. You have dove deep into both of these communities. How would you describe the differences between the Bitcoin and the Ethereum communities?
Sure. I mean, I think the Bitcoin community, they have mostly been interested and captured by this idea of global decentralized money and this kind of digital gold and this sort of cypherpunky ideas. And maybe at some point it was a little bit more diverse, and there were other people who were less focused on just that, but still part of the Bitcoin community. And I think those people have probably left for the most part and gone to Ethereum or gone on to do other things. And I think at this point, the Bitcoin community, is very, very focused on that particular use case. And so it's also a very political community, very libertarian, very anti-government, very radical, I think. And then the Ethereum community is just much more open-minded, I would say, much less ideological, more practical, more pragmatic, maybe don't have such strong shared values. And I think that's kind of how I see those two communities.
Why did the different sides of the Bitcoin community emerge in this huge rift around block size?
Yes, that's a good question. We have done many podcasts about this. Well, so to me, it doesn't exactly make sense. Because for me, I always understood this core Bitcoin digital gold value proposition. It made so much sense to me. And this is actually a big reason why I initially got interested in Bitcoin. That being said, I was also very interested in other applications. Then I had I thought Ethereum was great, etc. So with Bitcoin, to my eyes, it made a lot of sense to increase this block size and to bring on more capacity and thus have more users. And, with Epicenter, we've been running a business for years, and we would accept Bitcoin from advertisers who would pay our people in Bitcoin, and that worked fine. And then, at some point, it stopped working because the transaction cost $30 or $50. And if we had to pay our designer in India in Bitcoin, that just made zero sense, right? So we had to actually stop using it or move to Bitcoin Cash partially. And, it was highly irritating. So it's like, if you're using Bitcoin, seemed like such an obvious thing to me. And it seems like something that shouldn't be a political thing, but more a question of, what's the right choice? I honestly do not fully understand why there's been this opposition to increasing the block size, to some extent. But then I think what happened is just that we had this split, right? And we had these different ideologies and camps, and I think they became entrenched. And in the end, I think this actual issue that was just being discussed was almost a non-issue. It's a weird thing. I do not have any entirely satisfying answer of why it went that course.
Yeah, I need to interview somebody from Blockstream or a Lightning Network company about this because I'm equally confused. I just did a show with Roger Ver and I was talking to him about this, and I mean, I guess I can understand it from the standpoint of if I was to try to give the strongest argument for the smaller block size is that you could imagine a world where everybody wants to have a full node that runs on their mobile device and it's connected over Lightning Network, but I don't know, I'm not enough of an expert to really understand why that would be useful. Do you have a sense of the state of Lightning Network development? Is there some reason to emphasize smaller blocks for the sake of the Lightning Network?
Well, so we did the first episode about Lightning Network, I guess when that white paper came out, which was like 3 years ago or something like that. And even at the time, actually, we talked about the block size in that episode. I remember that. Because one of the things with the Lightning Network is that the security of you having Bitcoins on that Lightning Network actually depends on you being able to like close the channel and create a transaction on the main net. So if you have full blocks on Bitcoin, then it can get difficult to close out your Lightning Network channel. So it actually becomes less secure and less usable, the Lightning Network.
It becomes less usable if you have big blocks?
If you have small blocks, right? Because if you want to, first of all, opening a channel costs more money. Second of all, closing a channel costs more money. And third of all, if you have like a time limit sometimes to close a channel and to get your money, right? So if you can't close a channel in time, somebody can potentially steal your money. So if you have full blocks and you have to wait for a long time, Lightning networks can become insecure. So we talked back then with the authors of the white paper. So it was Joseph Poon and Todd Strija, and I think they actually agreed, you need bigger blocks for the Lightning network. So I don't think there's any reason why the Lightning Network implies that you shouldn't have bigger blocks. Of course, it is true that will have some demand move to the Lightning Network. So overall, it will decrease the necessity of doing on-chain transactions. But even for the Lightning Network, I think bigger blocks that aren't full would be much, much better.
Software workflows are different at every company. Product development, design, and engineering teams each see things differently. These different teams need to collaborate with each other, but they also need to be able to be creative and productive on their own terms. Airtable allows software teams to design their own unique workflows. Airtable enables the creativity and engineering at companies like Tesla, Slack, Airbnb, and Medium. Airtable is hiring creative engineers who believe in the importance of open-ended platforms that empower human creativity. The mission of Airtable is to give everyone the power to create their own software workflows. From magazine editors building out their own content planning systems, to product managers building feature roadmaps, to managers managing livestock and inventory. Teams at companies like Condé Nast, Airbnb, and WeWork can build their own custom database applications with the ease of using a spreadsheet. If you haven't used Airtable before, try it out. If you have used it, you will understand why it is so popular. I'm sure you have a workflow that would be easier to manage if it were on Airtable. It's easy to get started with Airtable, but as you get more experience with it, you will see how flexible and powerful it is. Check out jobs at Airtable by going to airtable.com/SEDaily. Airtable is a uniquely challenging product to build, and they are looking for creative front-end and back-end engineers to design systems on first principles, like a real-time sync layer, collaborative undo model, formulas engine, visual revision history, and more. On the outside, you'll build user interfaces that are elegant and highly customizable, that encourage exploration, and that earn the trust of users through intuitive, thoughtful interactions. Learn more about Airtable opportunities at airtable.com/SEDaily. Thanks to Airtable for being a new sponsor of Software Engineering Daily and for building an innovative new product that enables all kinds of industries to be more creative. Is there some set of vested interests that were able to shape the narrative here? That because This is, I think, Roger's sentiment is that there are these vested interests, and the Coinbases and the Blockstreams of the world were able to shape the narrative such that Bitcoin Core got to take the Bitcoin ticker, the BTC ticker symbol, and run with it, despite the fact that they didn't have a compelling reason to keep the block size small. But then again, I don't even understand what their vested interest would be, why they will make more money off of this smaller block size. Do you have a sense of that? Are you a conspiracy theorist?
I don't think it was about, some sort of secret business model for Blockstream or anything like that. I think to some extent it was just also about, these different camps and like this power. And then it became for the core developers about, okay, no, we will not be coerced, right? We will resist just because we can resist, and we don't want these companies or others with users to pressure us. And because the ironic thing is that even most of the blocks, we did podcasts with Adam Back and Greg Maxwell and, various people sort of on that side of this debate. And they would all agree that, yes, we should increase the block size, just not now and not this way. And then, they maybe would say, okay, 2 megabytes a year from now, which may have been 2 years ago. But then when that time came, again, they would be against it. I think it's a tragedy a little bit. I think for me, it certainly made very clear the importance of having processes for upgrading decentralized networks. And I think these need to be explicit processes, and the users of the networks need to actually have like a say and be able to execute this process. So I'm very interested in, on-chain governance and using tokens for voting. I think that's like a huge idea. And I'm sure it's going to take many years for that to really mature and to work well. But I do think that is kind of needed. Yeah, I mean, it may be that there's a sort of exception with Bitcoin, and there's something to be said for being like the chain that never changes, and Bitcoin today is the same or almost the same as what Bitcoin's going to be like in 3 years and 10 years. Because, of course, if you have digital gold in mind, then that kind of stability and continuity has value. But I think for building like technology and blockchain networks that are going to support many users, it's a terrible approach.
Didn't Vitalik and Vlad, who are guys that are pretty prominent in the Ethereum community, namely Vitalik, who invented Ethereum, but didn't they both come out against on-chain voting?
Yes, they did. Yeah, so they're against it. I think their argument is sort of, plutarchy, and then if you have coin hold.
What's plutarchy?
As a plutarchy is sort of, the government of the rich and the wealthy. And of course, if you have, one coin, one vote, somebody who has like 100,000 Ether, and somebody has, 0.1 Ether, the one person has like literally 1 million times the say in the system. So if you have something like Ether and you have voting with coins, you will have a small number of people who have, whales who basically will control the system. So I think that's absolutely correct. Now, the issue is, of course, now you also have a small number of people who control the system. And those are like the Ethereum core developers, of course, Vlad and Vitalik being two of them. I'm sure their intentions are genuine and they think it's better for Ethereum. And they may well be right that Ethereum is a little bit like Bitcoin, right? It's become a big system, a very valuable system. So it shouldn't do those kind of experiments, but it should progress slowly. So probably it does not make sense for Ethereum to implement, on-chain governance. But if you set up a new system, I think there's going to be so much innovation coming out of on-chain governance and out of those coin votings. And of course, the powerful thing is that you can always fork the chain and you could cut out those whales, right? So if you feel like they act against the interest of the users, like someone can take the chain and just say, okay, well, your voting power is gone. We're going to launch our own network. We're going to distribute the coins in a different way. So you do have a powerful kind of checks and balances in these systems. So I think it's the right direction to pursue. And I think we're going to see a lot of interesting things coming out of on-chain governance.
I wonder if, as applications get built on Ethereum, to what degree forking and building a new blockchain will remain feasible? Because you can imagine if somebody forked Linux and made Linux non-compliant with a bunch of applications built on top of Linux, well, probably the operating system would not see as much adoption. So I mean, I guess that's a side point to the argument we were just having, but it was, something I just thought of, like how much leverage will people have in the future as more and more infrastructure gets built on top of the core infrastructure we're getting today.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think forking can become difficult at some point. And yeah, I think it will depend a lot on the application. And of course, that provides some balance again, that it's good that there's some threshold, right? It's good that it isn't just super easy to like cut out other people and, sort of wipe out what has been built up. But you're right that if you have this base layer technology that becomes very entrenched, maybe forking and changing the distribution and changing those things would become very, very difficult. And, I understand those arguments. And of course, then I think what's super important is the distribution of those tokens. And I think then having wide and fairly egalitarian distributions will be valuable.
One thing I find interesting about the Ethereum versus Bitcoin community is that Ethereum's solution to scalability is, I would say, more ambitious than Bitcoin's solution to scalability. So I think Ethereum, they're not opposed to Lightning networks. They will have ideas that are like Lightning networks, but Ethereum is more pursuing this proof of stake avenue. And then they also have these, I talked to Christian Reitweisner, I think, about this other, what was it? Plasma, yeah, where you have these trees of blockchains. And these ideas are really cool. They're not exactly proven. Casper, for example, provides a rollout plan for proof of stake. Do you have a sense for how much progress has been made on the Ethereum scalability side of things?
Yeah, we actually just did a podcast about this a few days ago with Carl Flourish. He's one of the people working on
all of those. Carl's the best.
Yeah, he's cool.
I love Carl.
Yeah. So, I mean, my impression after that podcast was that actually the Ethereum scalability roadmap makes a lot of sense to me. I think it's very reasonable. It's well thought out, and it feels to me that it actually has a good chance of succeeding. Now, of those three things, right? So I think there's three key parts of it. One is proof of stake, the other is plasma, and the third thing is sharding. Now, of those three things, sharding, I really do not understand. We did do a podcast with Vitalik once years ago, and he tried to explain it, and I still didn't understand it. However, plasma seems actually pretty straightforward. And I think that's totally going to work. I don't see any reason why that wouldn't work. And the proof of stake, the Casper stuff, it doesn't look as trivial as plasma or as simple as plasma. But, I still think that I think overall confidence is high that, they will get this to work on some semi-reasonable timeline. So I actually think that Ethereum has a good roadmap, a good plan, and that they will be able to execute that. And if they do, maybe they have a chance of really having, this base chain and then lots of plasma chains and being able to support a huge amount of applications.
Plasma chains, those are like application-specific side chains?
They could be application specific or they could not be, but they are basically side chains. And the idea here is that the security is still kind of guaranteed by the main Ethereum chain, but that you can then run computation and move tokens to the side chains, and maybe the side chains among each other would also be interoperable and could be configured in different ways. It's sort of, it's actually kind of similar to the original sidechains vision that, the Blockstream people published. And of course, Cosmos, which I used to work on and still kind of work on, is a similar vision. So I think there's many chains being interoperable, like that is going to happen and it's going to work, and it is going to bring a massive amount of scalability and interoperability to the blockchain world.
Do you think it'll lead to interoperability between chains effectively, or do you think that's going to be dependent on the other chains? Like, will Bitcoin need to make certain adaptations in order to have significant interoperability, or what do you think the interoperability between currency story will look like?
Yeah, so of course with Cosmos, right? So people are, I think I saw you had Ethan Buckman on, no? So people will probably have some familiarity with Cosmos, right?
Yeah.
So with Cosmos, also the idea is that you're going to have this kind of bridge to Bitcoin, so that you'll be able to basically lock up Bitcoin and move it to another chain and then use it on the other chain and at some point move it back to Bitcoin. Now, the challenge is with Bitcoin has a very limited capabilities of sort of holding these Bitcoins in escrow. the only thing you can really use for that is multi-sig at this point, and multi-sig is not a good solution for that. Like, it's not going to work well. So, but however, the Blockstream guys and a lot of Bitcoin guys are very interested in this thing called Schnorr signatures, and I actually don't know much about it, but I think that should actually enable having those pegs as well to Bitcoin. So I think probably in the long run, even Bitcoin will be connected to that. And then when it comes to Ethereum or smart contract chains, I think it will be, fairly easy to connect all those chains. So I do think we are going to see, an internet of blockchains.
Talk a little bit more about Tendermint and your involvement in that project.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, I was working for Monax in 2015 and 16, and Monax was doing these enterprise chains, and they started with an Ethereum fork, and they wanted to have an Ethereum, in private Ethereum chains. So of course you can't use proof of work because it doesn't make sense for all those consortium members to do mining. And so the Monax guys, or the team, discovered Tendermint and started to use Tendermint. And then Ethan, he was working at Monax at the time, and he started to work on Tendermint as well and building Tendermint. And, then I joined Monax, and, we were basically trying to build and sell these applications, enterprise applications based on Tendermint. And Tendermint is really just, well, again, people will probably check out Ethan's podcast. There will be much more thorough explanation, but it's a very simple kind of consensus algorithm that allows, a particular number of parties to come to agreement about the order of transactions. And then the work started on Cosmos, and I joined Cosmos in January 2017. So it was a few months before the token sale, and I was kind of the first non-developer at that time, and I was working on that fundraiser, and scaling that company, and basically realizing this Internet of Blockchain, a Cosmos vision. And then I was working on that basically until the beginning of this year, and then I've left. And since then, I've started building a new company called Chorus One. And our focus right now is to run infrastructure for blockchain networks, in particular to run validators for proof of stake networks. So we are right now basically working on running some of that infrastructure of Cosmos once that network launches.
And tell me more about that. What does that mean that you're running validators for networks? Does that mean you're a infrastructure provider? So if you want to spin up some application specific blockchain and you want additional validation infrastructure, you provide that?
So that could be one thing, but actually the simple thing first is just that the token in Cosmos is called Atoms, right? So there's this staking token. And the idea of Atoms is that you can use Atoms to secure the network. So Atoms is a little bit like hashing power in Bitcoin, right? So let's say you have 10% of the Atoms. It's a bit like having 10% of the hashing power in Bitcoin. So you can vote on the validity of blocks, you can participate in governance and those kind of things. So if you're an Atom holder, you can basically say, okay, I want to participate in this process. I'm going to use my Atoms in this way, and I'm going to earn block reward and transaction fees, just like you could by running a Bitcoin miner. However, like you as a, for example, normal Atom token holder, you won't be, running that node that has this high availability node and highly secure and signs the blocks and all of that stuff. But it's a function a little bit like a mining pool, right? So someone who basically joins that voting power from the different miners, or in the case of Cosmos, right, joins that voting power from the different tokens and, simply produces blocks, validates transactions, and kind of runs the consensus process. So that's the function that we're building.
Is it hard to start a company around that's heavily involved in cryptocurrencies in this climate, this regulatory climate?
Well, I mean, starting a company is very simple, right? You should start a company. Of course, the question is, how is this going to be treated, once it's launched and once it's live and once we run the service? And you are right that it's a bit unclear how the service of validation and running these proof of stake networks will be treated by regulators. We think that it should be an unregulated activity, and we have spoken with lawyers about this. But that remains to be seen, and to be honest, we will have to deal with the problems as they arise, if they will arise.
Okay, so Tendermint provided some infrastructure and algorithms for this Internet of Blockchains. Ethereum has some space of Internet of blockchain's potential if the Plasma and Casper projects pan out. Is this a winner-take-all Internet of blockchains world, or do you envision a world where you have Ethereum and then you have this network of blockchains built around Ethereum, and then you have a more generalized blockchain network perhaps that can evolve with the Tendermint style blockchains that the Cosmos network enables, and you just have these different blockchain networks interacting with each other, or do you think there will be a winner take all? How do you think this will look in the scheme of things?
I don't think it's going to be winner take all. I think many of these approaches may pan out, and they have different pros and cons. So for example, if you compare Plasma and something like Cosmos, then with Cosmos, if you run your own Cosmos chain, then you can have your own governance and your own distribution of the staking tokens, and you can have your community that really controls fully that chain. Whereas with Plasma, the idea is that you're kind of inheriting the security of Ethereum, the root chain, right? So you don't have that same level of control. So I think those are different approaches. Now, some applications may not care, right? They will go on either one. So it may be a winner take much, I don't know, or it could really be just a wide variety of blockchains used in, for slightly different use cases, slightly different applications. I do think there's going to be a consolidation, and, maybe we'll have like 3 or 4 or maybe 10 big blockchain networks or types of blockchains. I don't think it's going to be 100.
Yeah, there's a lot of topics I wanted to continue to explore with you. Unfortunately, I'm almost out of time. We should definitely do another show in the future. I'd love to have you back on. But what are you focused on right now with Chorus? What's the roadmap?
We've been focusing on hiring primarily. So we hired our kind of a lead developer. We hired a researcher to, really understand a lot of these new protocols coming up and the dynamics and the economics and what it's like to run a validator in those. That's kind of what we're working on. We're still trying to hire a DevOps person, a DevOps engineer. So we almost basically built the initial team, and now we're working on building that initial product. And so that's, we want to be live when Cosmos goes live. So kind of with the Genesis block of Cosmos, like be there running that validator. And then the next things will be to, look beyond that, whether that's maybe running different Cosmos chains, or maybe we're going to be running a validator on something like Tezos or some of the other networks coming up. And yeah, so that's kind of the roadmap, at least for this year. I think that will be what we'll be focusing on.
There are a lot of applications on that Cosmos network.
I mean, right now it's not live yet, so there's none. There is a decent amount of interest. So in particular, one of the things that you'll be able to do in Cosmos, there's this thing called Ethermint. Ethermint is basically the Ethereum virtual machine running on top of Tendermint. So that means it's like you can run the exact same applications like in Ethereum, except much faster and much cheaper. And so what we can have in Cosmos is that you have this Cosmos hub, and then connected to it, you can have one of these Ethermint chains, or maybe many of these Ethermint chains. And if you have that, the nice thing is you could literally just take an application that runs today on Ethereum, and you can port it over there, and you will have, you can reuse your code and reuse your UI, and it will be extremely easy to do that. And I think it may well be, or it's likely that this is going to be ready before the Plasma chains. And so in that case, we really may be able to scale Ethereum in Cosmos earlier than Ethereum can scale Ethereum. And if that succeeds, then I think there could be a huge amount of demand, because there's so many projects today that basically built their application for Ethereum. It kind of works, but it doesn't work because the gas cost, the transaction fees in Ethereum is so high and the capacity is so low. So they're like waiting for a better Ethereum or more scalable and cheap Ethereum to come along. And so I think there's a real chance that Cosmos will be able to do that. And if that happens, then I think there's going to be very large demand, at least for that aspect, very soon.
Brian Fabian Crain, thanks for coming on Software Engineering Daily. It's really great talking to you.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Jeff.
GoCD is a continuous delivery tool created by ThoughtWorks. It's open source and free to use, and GoCD has all the features you need for continuous delivery. Model your deployment pipelines without installing any plugins. Use the value stream map to visualize your end-to-end workflow. And if you use Kubernetes, GoCD is a natural fit to add continuous delivery to your project. With GoCD running on Kubernetes, you define your build workflow and let GoCD provision and scale your infrastructure on the fly. GoCD agents use Kubernetes to scale as needed. Check out gocd.org/sedaily and learn about how you can get started. GoCD was built with the learnings of the ThoughtWorks engineering team, who have talked about building the product in previous episodes of Software Engineering Daily, and it's great to see the continued progress on GoCD with the new Kubernetes integrations. You can check it out for yourself at gocd.org/sedaily, and thank you so much to ThoughtWorks for being a longtime sponsor of Software Engineering Daily. We're proud to have ThoughtWorks and GoCD as sponsors of the show.
Wow!